This is Technically Legal, a podcast about legal technology, innovation in the legal industry, and the impact tech is having on the law. I'm Chad Main, the founder of legal services company Percipient, and on today's show, I'm talking to venture capitalist Yelena Shkolnik of Jump Capital. We're talking about investing in legal tech companies. The venture capital world. It's the realm of big bets, identifying new trends, and seeing potential where others might overlook it. And when it comes to an industry as established and, might I say, sometimes resistant to change as law, you'd think that VCs might not be that enthused about investing in legal tech companies. However, our guest today, Yelena Shkolnik, a venture capitalist at Jump Capital, tells us she thinks otherwise. She believes that investing in companies serving law firms and legal tech companies serving legal consumers could be a lucrative bet. Yelena's not a lawyer, and although she's from LA, she doesn't play one on TV either. However, she has worked in Hollywood. After getting a degree from the University of Chicago and a stint in investment banking, she started crunching numbers for the movie studio DreamWorks, which helped her develop an eye for identifying disruption and understanding market shifts. Now she's applying what she learned there to investing in the world of legal technology. As we will hear, Yelena understands the legal industry, while steeped in tradition, is ripe for innovation. In fact, Yelena and Jump have invested in companies we featured on the podcast, like New Era ADR. So, what makes a legal tech company catch the eye of an investor like Jump Capital? Yelena explains the firm's focus is on companies that have already shown real-world success and are ready to scale. She also fills us in on the importance of a company having a cohesive and capable team with a genuine grasp of the legal field. Yelena and I also explore the evolving landscape of legal tech itself, from tools empowering in-house counsel to solutions tailored for the unique challenges faced by law firms. We discuss the question of whether a legal background is a must-have for founders in this space, and whether legal tech itself will eventually merge into the broader tech ecosystem. You went to USC, though. Are you from Chicago area originally?
I'm from Ukraine. I grew up in Los Angeles
Okay.
predominantly, so that's there's no good reason for it.
Which is where you are now. You're back in LA, right?
Yep, I live in LA full time. Yeah,
What part of town?
Westwood, just south of
I
UCLA.
used to live a veteran in Santa Monica.
So close. That's so funny. Yeah, I'm maybe like 3 blocks south of you. That's
When I
funny.
first got out of law school, I went there and did work in the music industry. And yeah, that's where I was. That's where I was for about 10 years.
It's a good spot. I love it. It's a very quiet little neighborhood. It almost doesn't feel like you're in the middle of a big city.
Remember the Jack in the Box? I was literally up the hill from that Jack in the Box. That's where I was. Well, anyways, I digress. I like time of my LA days. So you go USC, undergrad and Booth Business School.
Yes.
You get into investment banking. What drew you to that? Is that ultimately, is that what you wanted to do going into school, or how'd you get there?
I definitely glamorized what investment banking was when I went into college. I was look when I was in school. Venture capital was not a thing. I didn't know a single person who wanted to do VC. That was not nearly as cool at the time. Private equity was like buyouts and middle market stuff, and so that was a typical path. As you go into investment banking, you get to be close to the transactions. You get to know some of those sponsors, the private equity folks, and then eventually you jump ship and you go to the buy side and you directly make investments in the companies. That was always my goal, was to have more connectivity to the companies, to be a partial operator, right? To be strategically involved and help companies grow. I loved investment banking. It was a lot of exposure to a lot of different companies, and you learn just the pragmatic way of thinking about what makes a company successful. Doesn't matter if it makes chips or if it sells produce, like whatever it does. You just know how to think about the profit margins, the cash flow, and it's essential, I think.
Before you get into VC, which we'll talk about in a second, you get into, I think you work at DreamWorks, you get into
Yeah.
entertainment. Is that a product of you being in LA, or did you have an interest in that, or how'd that come about?
It was a happy accident. It just so happens there DreamWorks at the time. So there was DreamWorks Animation right under Katzenberg, and there was DreamWorks Live. They were two separate entities. Spielberg ran the Live, and it's called Amblin now. And at the time, the person who had run finance, the CFO there, Larry, he had always had a second in command who was a banker. Like, he was repeatedly recruiting bankers, and then they would sort of go on to do business school and do other things. And they kind of had a track record. The people, the two predecessors before me had been at UBS being investment bankers, kind of easy, because what do? We do like a lot of Excel modeling, and film finance modeling is, I think, a lot more complicated than people give it credit for. We actually do the same kind of simulations as people who drill for oil wells, right? Because you never know what's going to be a hit, and you have to master a whole portfolio. And
Extrapolate on that. Like, tell me the analogy between drilling for oil and drilling for butts and seats at the theater.
We use these Monte Carlo simulations. So basically, we finance a whole slate, and our financing partners would do that with us, right? So generally speaking, people don't finance like an individual movie for a studio. So we have financing partners across our titles. And there would be some larger pictures, these tentpole pictures, $200 million and up. And there would be some budget pictures. Like, for example, we produced The Help when I was there. And that was a home run for us on a relatively small budget. And there are even some, smaller films in that. You compose your slate of all those things and you do a lot of math to say, well, hey, if, 20% of them pop, if 40% of them pop, and over how long a period of time, because you only realize those revenues over 10, 15 years, right?
Akin to the wells, you're not looking at one film, you're looking at your slate. You gotta figure
The whole
out what
thing.
the okay, that makes sense.
Kind of like the VC portfolio, not too different. Yeah.
What was your favorite film that you worked on?
I loved The Help, but we did Cowboys and Aliens when I was there. I think it should have been a bigger hit than it was. I don't understand why people did not gravitate to that title. It was exceptional.
Speaking of Hollywood and film, have you heard about this new show on Apple TV? I just watched the first episode last night, The Studio?
I've seen billboards for it everywhere. I gotta put it in my queue. I have to finish White Lotus, obviously. I think we're all waiting for that, and then
I only watched first episode, but it's hilarious, and it's got everybody in there, like, including guys like Scorsese's in the first episode, so I recommend it.
top of the
But
list.
again, I digress. So you're in entertainment, film finance,
Yep.
there for a year or so. That's the point you make the jump to VC or pretty close around there? Am I missing something there?
So, for some background, when I was at DreamWorks, the philosophy at DreamWorks was we just make good movies, right? Where Spielberg makes good movies when we send them to the people. At the time, Netflix had just stopped shipping DVDs. They had just gone all in on streaming, and Hulu was a newer player. There were a couple of other things that people were a little closer to me. They might remember happening then. And it was really interesting to me because I was close to some of the LA tech ecosystem and I was seeing these things happen. And we did not care about them really at all at DreamWorks because our distribution partner was Disney. Disney did not care about them. It was such a small portion of our revenue at the time. I mean, streaming was, I don't think I'm saying anything proprietary, like, single digit percentage of value to us. It's not like they lacked foresight. I just think at the time it was really irrelevant. But for me, it was very relevant. I was very excited about that. So when I thought about going into venture, it was originally with media. I wanted to go invest in some of these things that I was seeing because I felt very transformational how people were going to view content. And my first role after going to business school was I actually worked with a bunch of seed funds and I eventually worked with MK Capital around that, right? The philosophy of backing some of these multi-channel networks that basically were aggregators of YouTube content. And we backed things like Machinima, which is a gaming channel on Awesomeness TV. And when I joined Jump even, that was the philosophy. Like I originally started with Media Lens, so I backed Tubi, which we sold to Fox. And then some of the enterprise side of that too, which is just help publishers and advertisers think about streaming and all those things. So that was the original angle, yeah.
I wanna go back to the Disney thing, and streaming was a small part of it. It really wasn't on the radar because I think there's some analogies to old school legal, right?
Yeah.
Coincidentally, that's also when I left LA because the music business took a change and budgets dried up because Napster came out. I mean, it was a little bit before that, but same concept, right? And the question to you about that is, why wasn't that important to the big companies then? Because you gotta see it's going that way. I mean, everything was streaming. Like, why would they think it was gonna be, theaters and DVDs till the end of time?
In their defense, no, it was not obvious everything was going that way. It was also not obvious how long that would take. So I'll give you the example of, even at the time that I was there, home video revenues, home video, like the VHS and stuff, were a meaningful chunk of revenue. And already at the time that wasn't that big a thing, right? So go to Blockbuster or, your local retail location, the red box was still really meaningful at the time, right? We actually made just a chunk, maybe like 30, 40% on the box office. This is where people assume we make most of our money. It's not true. It's generally on the tail. So all the home video, all the way down to like when it shows up in an airplane, right? Like that's how we make money. And on top of that, we were licensing a lot of that stuff away. So we were getting upfront payments and, we could work with licensing partners. And so how, they would materialize some of that revenue wasn't maybe as important to us, I would say. And this is sort of true for customers of any industry all the time, and legal would be the same. They look at what's immediately in front of their face, right? What are you compensated on? Deliver great titles, the box office revenue is X, the home video revenue is Y. What's in the next 3 to 5 years? It's not a requirement of the job to kind of look up and stare at the sky and say, like, I wonder how big streaming is going to
Right.
be. So I think it was very reasonable that it wasn't obvious to them, but it clearly was very obvious to.
We need to do more with less. That is the key takeaway nowadays from almost every survey of in-house counsel. But what if it didn't have to be that way? What if you actually could do more for less? By combining legal expertise and technology, Percipient enables legal teams to get more work done for less. Buried in contracts and sales is frustrated with turnaround time? We can help with that. Did you just get hit with a subpoena and reviewing 100,000 documents and files will tax your resources or cost you a small fortune in billable hours? We can help there too. Our team of legal professionals leverage tech and project management principles with the right amount of human oversight to deliver precise, efficient, and cost-effective legal solutions. Whether it's legal operations and contract management support, subpoena compliance, or document review, Percipient is your partner in really doing more for less. Percipient. Legal services powered by technology.
Netflix.
So you've already mentioned some of the companies that you invested in as VC. They were media related, enterprise related. You get to Jump. So I got a two-pronged question about Jump. Number one is tell me how you got there. And number two is let me step into the role that I'm a company soliciting, I want you to invest in my company. Tell me why I should, if Jump is interested, go with you.
So how I found Jump, I was working with a different venture fund. I was looking at other spots to sort of build my career, and I ran into the folks at Jump. Coincidentally, in like two separate places, one of my colleagues, Peter Johnson, I ran into him at a crypto conference. This was back in, like 2015. They were, literally giving Bitcoin away at the door because nobody wanted it. So that was how early we were into that. And I think it was just kind of a, hey, we have a shared curiosity about these things. And then I met the rest of the team somewhere up by Napa. And I really loved them, right? Like it just was so clear to me that these were folks that I trusted and respected. And I remember kind of riffing with them on a couple different topics, right? Media, yes, but really they were fintech folks. The DNA of this fund, a lot of our LPs have come from financial services, and a lot of my partners have a fastball there. So we were talking about a lot of interesting stuff that was happening in fintech at the time. It was very early for consumer banking. Like some of those early banking players had just emerged. There was a bunch of lending platforms that were emerging. And we just had so much fun kind of moving through these things together. And the thing I always loved about them, I still love about them, is there's just nothing personal about those debates. Like I feel like we just get in there, we kind of debate the integrity of the business, where the market is headed. We want to have fun with those conversations, and I feel like at the end of the day, we're all just very good friends. So that was what drew me to it. But to your second question, I do think it's fundamentally probably two things. One of them is that vibe very much carries over to our founders. Fundamentally, I think if you got founder references on us, they would say they just kind of like hanging out with us. There is a lot of personality here. We tend to be a really good partner. We lead rounds. We're on the board. We like to be that first phone call. A lot of people say that. I think we really are. And we get close to founders who build relationships that outlast the duration of that particular investment. It'll be the next time they build another company too, we hope, right? So I think it is about that, the tenure. Like, for example, I've been at this fund for 10 years. My colleagues have been here for 8, 10, the same, right? So you don't lose the partner or the champion that invested in you. It doesn't feel transactional. It feels very cohesive. So I think a piece of that is very much the vibe of this firm. The other piece of it is we are very thematic. So we evolve our thinking every year. We publish in the areas we're really passionate about, and we do a lot of work in them. And a founder never has to show up and try to explain this space to us, right? Hey, I'm interested in legal. I'm going to specifically do IP. I would consider it a failure if I walked into that meeting and didn't already have a perspective on that industry, right? I don't need you to explain the size of the market. I want to ask you questions about how you think about it, but I don't want to make you sort of recant that to me. So I think that is a big part of our sell, is how we operate with founders and also how we thematically look at the world.
You mentioned historically you've been media enterprise, but you've gotten into legal lately. New Era ADR, we've had Rich Lee on the podcast a couple of times or participate there. How does Jump think about the legal tech industry right now? I ask that because historically it was, kind of entrenched. You had big players, a little archaic. And I think over the last 5 years that has changed. And you got some real nimble companies like New Era ADR. So what interests you personally, and then Jump into legal? And how do you guys looking at the industry as of right now in 2025?
It might be helpful to know a little bit about how we got into it. So I said there was kind of a fintech fastball, and I eventually gravitated to a lot of fintech as well. Most of that in our portfolio will look like consumer-facing brokerage, but we did a lot for the FIs as well. So a lot of compliance and solutions for them. And that was sort of what brought us to the compliance suite, which eventually became the CLO suite. So the evolution of that GC office, which was kind of the isolated GC cost center, effectively, in an enterprise, to now the CLO and, cyber risk rolls up into them, and data privacy rolls up into them, and compliance rolls up into them. And so the emergence of that role was very interesting to us. And so when we invested in New Era, for sure plays into that for enterprise, but also Link Squares, the CLM business. When we made those investments, it was how do we kind of fortify that? And then I think our focus has evolved a little bit from there still is, I think, plenty of opportunity for that GC suite and how do you make legal ops more powerful. But now we're very interested in maybe the other side of litigation, which is, of course, the law firm side. And as you say, there are some very entrenched, difficult dynamics there where an enterprise might be a little more quick to move on things that would be cost efficient for them or create opportunity for them. They might be nimble in response to the fact that cyber risk or some data privacy for stuff, some cases it's like a personal liability. So they have a responsibility to do some of these things. Law firms are different, right? There's a billable hour, is a very different dynamic. And so we're very intrigued by that space, but we really want to pick our battles. And some of the things we published about are there are opportunities in legal research, there are opportunities in medical chronologies. Hard to ignore the impact of AI on some of these things. But you have to pick the places where either it's billable through to a client or, there's another way to make that sort of palatable to a firm. We'll see actual adoption and stickiness.
You mentioned there, you talk about law firms specifically, but I know that you also are interested in companies that serve in-house legal departments. But what interests you about the law firm dynamic, the potential law firm as a consumer and companies that serve that?
I could tell you that it's, Arizona and the loosening of some of those regulations that create the opportunity. And I do think, yes, private equity will probably buy up some of that. And yes, there will be a different focus on efficiency there. That's a very natural result. It's happened a lot slower than people had sort of expected, right? I mean, that's been a hope for a while, and it didn't really materialize. Fundamentally, owning a law firm is pretty complicated. So I'm not sure I would index too much there. I would say, eh, the pushback on the billable hour, we don't really want efficiency because, we're billing these hours, we want to bill all the hours. Customers dictate a lot of this, right? So if customers know what they're doing on their side, they see the efficiency that they're getting with AI in their own legal suites, they're gonna push back on the billables, right? It's a little bit like pushing back on some of the research, right? That is no longer, I would say, like kind of individually case billable. That's effectively like firm overhead. Because the customer is eventually gonna say, like, enough is enough. Like, I know you don't need this many hours to process this deposition or to summarize this document, right? Can't charge me for this. And at that point, it is just sort of forced on them. But I also think there are a couple of spaces where you can just be competitive in a very different way. Like IP is an example of, maybe you can do better claim charting. Maybe you can be faster to the draw when a company is looking for a partner to help them litigate. And you can have a more compelling argument there. Like there's a lot of magic to medical chronology and some of the summarization there because for a law firm that's certainly on the personal injury side and contingency based, right? That is the opportunity to resolve cases faster, resolve more cases. So yes, there is opportunity there. You just again you have to pick where.
Okay, so I'll hold you to we're gonna talk in 2 years from now about your position that clients are gonna push back on the billable hour because
You don't
I've
think
been
so?
hearing this for a long time, and because here's part of it. You know that old saying, "Well, no one ever got fired for hiring Kirkland and Ellis," because part of it is like, I hired the best law firm or best lawyer out there to do it, so that's what it costs. It cost me $1,000 an hour. There's kind of a CYA element to it. But I am with you, and I'm hopeful that clients do push back on it and say, "Look, come on. This didn't take you 500 hours to draft this one motion or do this in one deal," But I think that's what stops that from happening sometimes.
A lot of bills are already negotiated, some off the top already, right? That's kind of assumed. But I would also say there is a very real shift in how law firms operate. Like if you think about before the CLO movement, before that kind of dynamic in the enterprise, which that's many decades old at this point, and I think GE effectively initiated that. Before that, you would have a board level relationship with a law firm, right? There was one law firm, and whatever matters came up in that firm, like you got your buddy, your partner at K&E, and he said take care of those issues and siphon them off across the firm. You have legal procurement now
Yeah.
and across various matters, you're duking it out, right? So I don't think it's quite as easy to say, hey, I did the safe thing and I paid, the one firm. You don't have a single relationship with one firm. You have to answer to, hey, someone came in 30% under and you still picked the more expensive firm. Like there's going to be a little bit of justification for why you think that performance
Right.
is the same.
Yeah, procurement, that's a good point. As you were saying that, I was thinking that too, because they definitely, to your point, as legal ops grows, they definitely are more involved in like deals we're doing it. They're definitely more involved. Okay, so let's say that I'm a legal tech founder. I have a company. I want to pitch to you. I want to pitch to Jump. What's going to make me most attractive to you? And at what point should I reach out to you and say, hey, I'm looking for money. Here's my idea. Here's what we got going on.
A couple things there. So we are a Series AB focused shop, which what does that mean? Most of the companies that we write a meaningful check into are on their way, right? So they might have $1 million, $2 million of revenue. That revenue could be a number of different formats, right? It could be usage-based, it could be transactional, it could be recurring, but generally speaking, we've got some indication. That isn't revenue from one client. That's your revenue from a handful of clients, more that says, hey, there's something really repeatable, that you've built some real technology here that's very sticky, that people like, right? And by the time we show up, you probably got 1 year of, cycling through some renewals. Like, we've got some evidence. This is a thing that works and people like it. I could call up some customers and they would say, hopefully effusively, I love this thing. It's the greatest thing since sliced bread. I would quit if I couldn't use it anymore. All that good stuff. So those are the things. And of course, the founder is incredibly important. And I'm very happy about the incredible mix of founders that we have in our portfolio. They all are amazing and wonderful and blow you away in different ways. But you can be many different archetypes of founder and be incredibly successful. So it'd be hard for me to tell you exactly what that person looked like. I would also complement that, though, with we are pretty thematic and we know some of the areas that we do and do not want to tango with. So some of this isn't so much founders calling us up as, other us reaching out because, hey, we're very serious about this one sector of legal and we want to talk to everyone in the space and make sure we're really grounded in what the opportunity is here. Or more likely, a seed firm that was a previous investor in this thing saying, hey, we know Jump really likes this space and they have a fastball here. How can we get you guys connected?
So you just said seed firm. Sounds like you don't do much, if any, seed investment at all.
It is a philosophy for us to be more thematic than anything else. So sometimes we absolutely love a space and, and in fact, Rich knew that was an earlier deal for us. We absolutely love a space and absolutely love a founder. We will go a little earlier and sometimes we'll go a little later. But if we had our druthers, what is our favorite thing to do? I would say write the Series A or B check and be the lead on that, investment and sit on the board, do all that good stuff.
You mentioned the founder is important. I know there's different varying views on this, but what's your take on a non-technical founder and your take on the solo founder who doesn't have somebody with them for the ride?
Well, those are two very different things. I do heartily believe in the buddy cop dynamic. I would say I think about the success stories in our own portfolio, the success stories that I've generally been privy to be close to. Like that tends to be someone who's kind of a big visionary, great, huge opportunity. Let's go run this thing down. But they're kind of up there in the clouds and they sell that vision very well to customers. Customers run with them for that ride. And then there's one other person in that room who says, and now we pay the utility bill, right? Like just as another person that makes it work. And those two people got to be in perfect sync. And when that happens, that incredible harmony, it could be you've been best friends since you were born. It could be that you just met last year, but you're just a good match for each other. You are the yin to the yang and let's go. I think that is a relationship that works very well. We've also seen a decent amount of success with a founder who's just got a very good C-suite, right? So you just got a lot of other executives around him and they balance themselves well that way. It is atypical for a single founder to do everything. I want to be clear that technically speaking, every day that becomes easier, right? When you think about all of the Copilot on app development, all of the capabilities that you have, how far you can get as a single individual is incredible. But running a business is not just the technical, the product. It is so much more than that. And it is a lot to ask of a human being to be simultaneously product oriented and commercial and, eventually good at managing the whole team and customer success and 10 other things, right? It's just too much. And so it is very important to us, I think, to get some sense of the whole team and see who they trust and how they bounce off each other. And frankly, that's how we learn how they hire and, how they draw people in and all this good stuff. So I prefer more. And yes, I think it is relatively important, arguably essential, to have more of that technical capability internal to the team, right? If you're offshoring that stuff, if you're outsourcing, if you don't really own it, it is very hard for you to turn cycles when your customers tell you that they hate something or love something.
What about the founder who doesn't come from a tech background? Obviously, they got to be probably savvy enough to understand it conceptually, but does that bother you? And actually, as I asked that, does AI now change that? Because with vibe coding and all this, maybe it's less important to have that technical background.
So I don't want to confuse sort of technical like engineering and technical like product. I think it's a very different alchemy to be a really fantastic product manager and understand where the product needs to go and then what needs to happen from an engineering perspective to deliver that. You cannot just sort of go sell a dream to customers and then realize you do not know how to build it. You do need to have some competency on what it requires, and to be able to speak the language of both is a really magical thing. There are incredible PMs, product managers who are not themselves, technical, didn't specifically do that. They could come from a number of different lines of work, but they just learn learn to speak both languages and they're very successful there. That kind of person can be an incredible archetype for a CEO. And they can be complemented by a person who is a VP of engineering and who actually executes a lot of that. But eventually you need someone sitting there too, because the hiring of other folks in that space, you need someone who knows how to hire, who knows how to test some of those skills. Like, again, you don't want to outsource something that's so core to your competency, the product itself. I do think that, yes, AI makes it easier to build things, but I think that's in a slightly more superficial way than at this point you would really want. I mean, if you're talking about taking a whole, 1,000-person law firm onto a platform, you need the level of security and capability that, like, you're just not going to spin up overnight on an app development platform. Like, you need to have that, capability and strength in-house.
That leads me to another question that I have, legal tech. Do you think it's important that the legal tech founder come from a legal background or have some experience with it to understand it? Because this is just an aside, and it's I can't think of anybody top of mind or something, but I feel like there's companies out there that think this is a problem for lawyers when it's not, because they didn't come from or have exposure to the legal world. What's your take on that?
This is an interesting one because there are a lot of software players in legal that did not come from legal,
Right.
right? They came from all avenues of the world, but not legal. I think the folks who kind of hop into it by accident or basically because they think, hey, AI is here. What is the thing I can throw AI at? And one natural inclination is, well, legal. There's a lot of documents. Let's go
Right.
process those. Great. Yes, I do think those folks are likely to hit some walls with the appreciation or what the complexity is of that ecosystem of who the buyer even is inside of a law firm, how distinct the buyer is in an SMB law firm versus a mid-market law firm versus an enterprise law firm, how different the cycles in terms of like renewals are. I mean, yes, there's a lot to learn there. But I would also say just in terms of like a good founder profile, lawyers can be tricky. Lawyers are, how do we say, analytical, right? Very, very thoughtful. They can be a little slow moving. So the person who may be the most acutely aware of a problem is likely not the perfect fit to go solve it. And I'd also say that just like a person who has no experience in law, what often happens with someone who comes from law is that they are so myopically focused on their practice area or the way that their firm ran that they may too have a problem that is kind of their problem and not actually a problem that is $1 billion problem that is a massive thing to solve. So there's no perfect answer to it. You have to have some legal competence on your team. You need to understand who you're selling into. If someone had the DNA to come from there, that's great. I don't think it's vital.
Yeah. Does legal tech ever just become tech? And what I mean by that is, we talked about this a minute ago. Historically, legal tech's been entrenched. You've had the players that, historic ones that dealt with the industry and information and the technology for that. But technology's advanced. And the example I want to give here is, like, for instance, project management software like Jira or Asana. There's no reason law firms can't use that. In fact, some of our customers use Jira for their legal processes. Why do we have to have a legal tech app that's project management for legal or for accounting? Like, do you ever see a time where it's just tech that legal uses just like any other industry?
I mean, this is a conversation just about vertical software generally. Like, why does there need to be a healthcare tech? Why does there need to be, fintech? Yeah, a couple thoughts, right? So, and I would also separate like vertical software versus vertical AI. Those are slightly different things, but just even for the purposes of kind of like lumping it in together with AI, like, the Microsoft suite. Lawyers use a Microsoft suite. So does everybody else, right? There's nothing specifically magical about legal for using Microsoft, but the fact that lawyers live in Word documents has been something that has infused legal tech. So like Spellbook and some of those other things have embedded themselves into Word and kind of learned off of those practices. I would say a lot of those vertical players, for sure, they're going to have a data advantage, right? Because, yeah, I mean, just try. Go to GPT today and kind of ask it to give you
Right.
some precedent, right?
It'll give you precedent. It may not be real, but it'll give it to you.
Yeah. Like part of the challenge is it will not have unique data, right? So it will not have the overlay of editorial content that Alexis might have. It certainly won't have the resources that you would have in your internal firm that you could aggregate as part of a vertical solution. So it won't learn from all of that stuff. But there's also some unique workflows to law that are distinct to other industries, right? An insurance adjuster might not work in Word quite as much. And so they want a capability that is in their workflow and their systems, right? And so there is something about the workflow, there's something about the actual data processing, there's something about the format of the output. Actually, specialization makes sense. One of the questions that comes up all the time is, well, now AI is so amazing, it's so easy to build capabilities. Let's say not just that a horizontal player can do everything, but why can't I build my own special, unique thing? This is Kirkland Analysis special law firm tech, and here's Jump Capital special tech stack that we invented every piece of this in house. And to that, I would say, I think the average person does not understand how many different pieces of software, hundreds of pieces of software the average enterprise manages. And the idea that they would build all that internally, maintain all that internally, when all that stuff is not core. I mean, what's core is to be a law firm and to drive billings and to do law, right? I think that's crazy. So I don't think that's coming anytime soon. Like, could you build your own version of Word? Sure. Why would you do that, right? And it wouldn't collaborate with other people's versions of things. It wouldn't be a natural, there's no network effect to it. I just don't think that's coming. I think vertical has a real advantage, and in legal especially does. I don't know if that's true for every other industry. Maybe there are some industries where that's not as true. We don't spend as much time in healthcare. Maybe there's some more horizontal adjacencies there. But my guess is everywhere the workflows are a little specialized, and people want to feel, by the way, in the sales process, like who you're selling to. And so they resonate better with a CRO, with a VP of sales who calls them up and says, I know law, I know your customers, I've sold to other customers that are like you. I understand what security protocols, what kind of data you're dealing with, and I'm going to deliver specific to you that value.
Pitch deck. What do you like in a pitch deck?
I don't really care about those. I think
All right, that's what I'm asking. That's all I wanted to know.
we do all this work on the thematic stuff, right? So usually what's a pitch deck? It's like, a few slides about there's a problem, it's really big. And like I said, we do the work on that. We're having this conversation. We know there's a problem, it's big, let's chat about it. The metrics, the performance of the business, like we'll get that conversationally. It's very rare. I would hate this if someone sort of showed up and they just flipped slides and, felt like they were presenting to us and it was really stiff and uncomfortable. Again, it's like the vibe of our firm. It's meant to be a conversation and dynamic at every point of the process. By the way, this isn't about a founder kind of like showing their wares and us saying yes or no. This is about a relationship that gets built from step one. And they too have many choices in venture partners, right? So it has to go both ways. They have to understand how we work in those conversations. We need to be having some sort of like conversational dynamic. And they also, should hear our questions and our concerns and be responsive to them. We learn a lot about how they are responding to those things. I don't learn that much if someone just recites a deck to me. So I don't outright hate them. They exist. They're helpful. They're nice takeaways. But my guess is, we go from a conversation to a data room if we're excited, and we kind of skip that step.
You said they're helpful, though. When are they helpful, and how are they helpful? Like, what's a conversation not going to give you that a pitch deck may be able to?
The place where they're useful is when someone is trying to introduce that company to us. So, like, if a seed firm or somebody is saying, hey, I'm an angel investor in this company, I think it's kind of interesting. Here's a deck for you to get some sense of it.
Oh, you're talking about like, hey, email. You get an email from your buddy who's the seed investor, and she sends it, says, hey, this is Acme Legal Tech Inc. Check it out.
There are some companies that don't shine, like just in terms of what they do. It's not obvious, or it's an incredibly competitive space. And so you need like a few more pages to say, what's the special sauce, or, to blow people away. And if you're not in every single conversation, you need something that talks for you. So you make a good deck, you really bring forward the things that are making you special, that, if your particular tactic on the industry is odd and hard to convey, like that's a magic that you can put in the pitch deck. Still, like, the likelihood the pitch deck is the reason I take the call. It's probably not enormous, but
That's interesting. Yeah, that's I never thought of that. That's interesting. Okay, let's talk about you've invested in the company, did the Series A. They've been around for a few years. What, in your experience, and this transcends what industry, it's not just legal. What attributes do companies have that grow and are successful? What have you seen?
look, every company's got some bumps. So I think a lot of founders are disheartened because all they see on
Yeah.
LinkedIn is everyone moving up and to the right. And so they think, everyone wakes up at 5 a.m. in the morning and drinks a smoothie and, just crushes it. I don't think that's true. Even our most successful companies, hiccups all the way, right? There's all sorts of stuff that comes up. But there is kind of a magic to the way the team gels that's consistently pretty true. Like I said, it's not generally one person, right? There's kind of like a team performance that's really good. We tend to be impressed by a handful of people in that cohort. And we feel like we can communicate with all of those people and we see how they kind of symbiotically kind of operate and attack things together. There does tend to be a general up and to the right motion, though, I would say. Like, some of the comments that a VC might make is like a green company stays green, a yellow company might go to green, a red company. It's a hard thing to get to yellow. So I think a company that has kind of a metric and a pattern of success, and all the people on the team are kind of rowing the boat the same direction, and they all have a very similar vision. They're all executing at the top of their game. You will see, like, month over month, they're going to book really well. They're going to deliver for those customers. Retention will be really strong. That'll feed into more success. There is, a great little effect to that. Companies that hit some meaningful snags, like, for example, the macro crumbles on them, right? And there's no budget for anything. And all of a sudden they lose customers. It's very hard to kind of claw your way back out of that. But we have certainly seen people do that. Yes, I mean, there's a little bit of luck in it too, right? Like, some of our companies that have been very successful happen to time the market a little bit better, and it just so happened that the purse strings opened up in that period of time for a variety of reasons. Or it's kind of like that old comment that, the harder we work, the luckier we get. Like, I think people put in the legwork, and it is about that team dynamic, probably.
5 years from now, what do you think Legal Tech's looking like? What's the popular app? Where's it going? What's going to excite you 5 years from now?
We actually did publish a piece on the consumer side of legal, and I do think that's very interesting. Obviously, the dynamic in the United States is a little more restrictive on what you can do with GPT versus a human lawyer, whereas other jurisdictions globally may not be so limited. And so I think that slows access to justice a little bit, but it is such an interesting idea to think, that next version of LegalZoom that actually is guidance on legal matters, but more than that is, the effectuation of outcomes, right? Like that we can refute an eviction notice, that we can, actually like support a family law matter, that we can prepare a dissolution of a business. There's so many things that, like, functionally the docs are not that hard. Like, you can do it.
Just file something. Like, a lot of the problems access to justice wise is because people, they default, they don't think they can do it, right?
Right. So maybe even if we just remove the scariness. So this is approachable. Yes, there are a lot of municipal codes, and that seems incredibly daunting, but you don't
Right.
have to have gone to law school. Let us, like, at least make that a little more understandable, even if we don't change the UPL code. Maybe we can still do a lot. So I think that part of it is interesting. You'll see that. There's been a lot of assumption that what happens is that, software just makes it so much easier to go litigate everything, that there will be more litigation. And I'm sure a piece of that is true. I mean, there is also more litigation funding, and there is going to be more of that. Yes.
But hey, maybe it goes online AI too, like new era.
Yes, exactly. I think there will be more venues, and, you think about, like, bringing small claims to court. And again, there's so many legal matters that, like, people don't even think they're legal matters because they're like, I can't afford a bill for this. I wouldn't even consider this a thing that I can deal with. I'm just going to, punt this. And now they will get elevated and handled. And I think that's kind of nice. And I do think the law firm will be reshaped a bit. I would say that this is kind of a nice media parallel, because I kind of remember early in media when people who were very bullish on the Netflix use case, if you remember, they had said that Netflix is going to, buy Disney and all the old studios will be gone. And like, at the time, I was very vocal about, like, don't sleep on Disney, guys. It's a really big, very, very successful business for a lot of reasons. And it continues to be. And I think I don't underestimate the capability of what some of those law firms have built over time, not just the credibility with their clients, but the consistency of their own performance, what they've learned. There's a lot of human things to learn about the, practice of law. So I am not bullish that, your comment, like, all the billables will go away and there's just going to be some alternative legal fee structure and, it's just AI. None of that. I do think our standard for efficiency will go up. Like, I kind of remember when I was in investment banking, I used to bind books. Like, we would print out the decks and I would bind them personally. And at this point, everything is digital. That work has gone away. That doesn't mean investment banks have, right? I think that the lawyers hopefully will just get more time to do the things that they love and to make great arguments in court and to take the cases that they are really passionate about. And that will make it maybe even more fun to practice law.
Appreciate your time. If people want to get a hold of you, learn more about Jump, where do you want to send them?
Jumpcap.com. Come visit us. Let us know how you're feeling. I think there's a info at jumpcap.com link, and send us your notes. Tell us how you feel. You can find us on LinkedIn. All of us are on there.
Okay, that's a wrap for today's episode. As always, we really appreciate you listening. If you want to subscribe, you can find us on most major podcast platforms like Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, etc. Also, if you like us enough, I hope you leave us a favorable review. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, this has been Technically Legal.